I stood in that courtroom watching the two people who destroyed my childhood laugh at me like I was nothing. They sat across the aisle in designer clothes, leaning back in their chairs like they owned the room. Like they owned me. Their lawyer had just finished painting me as some manipulative gold digger who tricked a lonely old man into leaving me millions. The jury looked at me with doubt in their eyes. My hands shook so hard I had to press them flat against my thighs. This was it. This was where I either walked away with nothing or proved that love means more than blood. My name is Maribel Knox. I'm 26 years old, and until 3 months ago, I worked as a claims assistant at a small insurance firm in Denver, Colorado. My life was simple, quiet, safe. I had a studio apartment with a view of the parking lot, a cat named Pepper, and weekly dinners with the only father I'd ever really known. Then Calder Hale died from a stroke, and suddenly the world wanted to know who I was, and why a man worth $8.5 million left everything to me instead of his real family. Except I was his real family. The two people laughing across from me? They were strangers who happened to share my DNA. Lena Cortez sat there in a cream blazer that probably cost more than my rent. Her hair was perfect. Her nails were perfect. She looked like someone who had never missed a meal or cried herself to sleep on a metal bench. Royce Cortez wore a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. He kept whispering to their attorney, a man with silver hair and a smile that made my skin crawl. Every few minutes, Lena would glance at me and shake her head like she pitied me. Like I was the one who should be ashamed. The judge hadn't even started yet, and I already felt like I was losing. My lawyer, a tired-looking woman named Ms. Brennan, sat beside me with a folder Calder's estate attorney had given her. She told me to trust the process. She told me the evidence would speak for itself. But evidence doesn't shout over laughter. It doesn't drown out the voice in your head that says maybe you don't deserve this. Maybe they're right. Maybe blood does matter more than anything else. I gripped the edge of the table and tried to remember how to breathe. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A woman in the back row coughed. Lena's lawyer stood up and buttoned his jacket like he was about to deliver a closing argument in a murder trial. He looked at me the way you'd look at a bug on your windshield. Something small. Something in the way. Then the clerk stood. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. All rise. Everyone stood. Chairs scraped against the floor. The judge walked in, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that didn't miss anything. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and opened the file in front of her. The room went silent. You could hear people breathing. You could hear my heart trying to break through my ribs. Please be seated, the judge said. We sat. Lena crossed her legs and smiled at Royce. He nodded. They thought this was already over. They thought walking into this courtroom with their expensive lawyer and their biological connection to me was enough. They thought I was still that scared little girl they left behind. The judge started reading. This court has reviewed the petition filed by Lena and Royce Cortez contesting the last will and testament of Calder James Hale, deceased. The petitioners claim that as the biological parents of Maribel Knox, they have a superior claim to Mr. Hale's estate based on familial ties and alleged irregularities in the adoption process. My stomach twisted. Alleged irregularities. That's what they were calling it. That's how they were erasing 20 years of Calder showing up for me every single day. The judge kept reading. Her voice was steady, clinical, like she was reading a grocery list instead of deciding whether my entire life had been valid. The court has also reviewed extensive documentation provided by the estate, including adoption records, correspondence, financial records, and witness statements. Ms. Brennan reached over and squeezed my hand. I didn't squeeze back. I couldn't move. The evidence presented reveals a clear pattern of intent and legal compliance on the part of Mr. Hale, the judge continued. She looked up from the papers, and for the first time, her eyes landed on Lena and Royce. It also reveals documented evidence of abandonment. Lena's smile flickered. Just for a second. But I saw it. The judge wasn't done. Mr. Hale filed formal adoption papers within 6 months of taking custody of the minor child, Maribel Knox. Those papers were approved by the state of Colorado after thorough investigation. The adoption was legal, binding, and final. Royce shifted in his seat. His lawyer whispered something to him, but Royce didn't respond. He was staring at the judge like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Furthermore, the judge said, and her voice got colder, the court has reviewed a letter sent by Mr. Hale to Lena and Royce Cortez 15 years ago via certified mail and private investigator. In that letter, Mr. Hale offered to facilitate contact between the petitioners and their biological daughter. That letter was never answered. The room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at Lena. Her face had gone pale under all that makeup. Royce was shaking his head slowly, like he was trying to rewind time and make this go differently. Additionally, the judge continued, financial records show that Mr. Hale's wealth predates his guardianship of Maribel Knox by more than a decade. The claim that Miss Knox manipulated Mr. Hale for financial gain is not supported by any evidence. My lawyer squeezed my hand again. This time I squeezed back. The judge closed the folder. She took off her glasses. When she looked at Lena and Royce, there was something in her expression I couldn't quite name. Disgust, maybe? Or just exhaustion at having to deal with people like them. Blood relation does not erase abandonment, she said. It does not grant automatic rights to an estate when the deceased made his wishes clear through legal channels. Calder Hale chose Maribel Knox as his daughter. He chose her every day for 20 years. That choice is legally protected and morally sound. Lena stood up. Your Honor, Sit down, Ms. Cortez. Lena sat. Her hands were shaking now. Not mine. Hers. The judge picked up her gavel. The petition is denied. The will stands as written. This court finds in favor of Maribel Knox. The gavel came down. The sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Lena made a sound that was half sob, half scream. She turned to her lawyer, grabbing his arm. Do something. This isn't over. But it was over. I could see it in the judge's face. I could see it in the way the bailiff was already moving toward the door. I could see it in the way Royce had his head in his hands, realizing that they'd flown across the country and hired an expensive lawyer and dragged me through hell for nothing. Ms. Brennan stood. Thank you, Your Honor. I stood too, but my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The judge nodded at me, just once, and then she was gone. Lena was crying now, real tears, but they weren't for me. They were for the money she'd already spent in her head. The life she'd already planned. Royce looked at me across the courtroom, and for just a second, I saw something that might have been regret. But then his face hardened and he looked away. Their lawyer was packing his briefcase, moving fast like he wanted to get out before they could blame him for losing. Lena grabbed his arm again. We'll appeal. We'll take this higher. She can't just. There's no grounds for appeal, Ms. Cortez. The adoption was legal. The will was clear. I'm sorry. He wasn't sorry. Nobody in that room was sorry except maybe me, and I didn't even know why. Maybe because I'd wanted them to fight for me, not for money. Maybe because some stupid part of me had hoped they'd walk in and say they were wrong, that they'd regretted leaving me every day for 20 years, that they'd wanted to find me but didn't know how. But that wasn't what happened. That's never what happens. Ms. Brennan touched my elbow. Let's go. We walked toward the exit. Behind us, I heard Lena's voice rising. This isn't fair. We're her parents. We have rights. I stopped walking. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to hear what the judge would say. Maybe I needed to know if someone in authority would finally say what I'd been thinking since the moment they walked back into my life. The judge was still at her bench, gathering her papers. She looked up at Lena, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the entire courtroom. You have no rights here, Ms. Cortez. You gave those up 20 years ago when you left a 6-year-old child alone in a transit hub and never came back. The courtroom doors closed behind us, but I could still hear Lena crying. I could still hear Royce shouting. I could still hear their lawyer telling them to calm down, that making a scene wouldn't change anything. Ms. Brennan led me down the hallway, past people waiting for other cases, past lawyers in suits checking their phones, past a janitor mopping the floor like this was just another Monday. Outside, the Colorado sun was too bright. I stood on the courthouse steps and tried to understand what had just happened. I'd won. The judge had ruled in my favor. Calder's will would stand. The money was mine. But winning felt hollow when the thing you'd won was proof that you'd never been wanted in the first place. Ms. Brennan handed me a manila envelope. This is from Calder's estate attorney. He wanted you to have it after the ruling, regardless of the outcome. My hands were steadier now. I opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. The handwriting was Calder's, neat and precise, the same handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards and notes he'd left on the kitchen counter when he had to leave early for work. The letter started with 3 words that broke something inside me. You were chosen. Subscribe so you never miss a story where justice actually wins. Because what Calder wrote in that letter, it changed everything I thought I knew about family. 20 years earlier, I didn't know what chosen meant. I didn't know what abandonment meant either, not really. I just knew that my mom and dad told me to sit on a bench and wait, and I was good at following directions. So I sat. And I waited. And they never came back. The Denver Transit Hub wasn't the kind of place you'd leave a kid. It wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't safe either. Long hallways with tile floors that echoed every footstep. Vending machines that hummed in the corners. Screens showing departure times that kept changing. People rushed past pulling suitcases, checking phones, buying tickets. Nobody looked at me for the first hour. I was just another kid waiting for someone. My suitcase sat next to me on the bench. It was old, brown, with a crack running down one side that Royce had tried to fix with duct tape. Inside were 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, underwear, my toothbrush, and a stuffed rabbit named Cotton that I'd had since I was 3. Lena had packed it that morning while I ate cereal. She'd been humming. I remember that. She'd been humming like we were going on vacation. We're going to get the tickets, Royce had said, kneeling down so he was eye level with me. He'd smelled like cigarettes and the cologne he wore when he wanted to impress someone. You wait right here, okay? Don't move. Don't talk to strangers. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, I'd said. Lena had kissed my forehead. Her lips were sticky with lipstick. Be a good girl, Mari. Then they'd walked away, and I'd watched them disappear into the crowd. I'd swung my legs back and forth, waiting. The bench was cold even through my jeans. The transit hub smelled like floor cleaner and coffee. Announcements kept playing overhead, voices saying gate numbers and departure times and warning people not to leave luggage unattended. I held onto my suitcase handle just in case. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then an hour. The screens above the ticket counters kept changing. People came and went. A woman sat next to me for a few minutes, talking on her phone about someone named Derek who never listened. A man in a business suit bought a candy bar from the vending machine and walked away without looking at me. A family with 3 kids rushed past, the mom yelling at the oldest to keep up. I wasn't scared yet. Not really. I thought maybe Royce and Lena were stuck in a long line. I thought maybe they'd forgotten which bench they'd left me at and were looking for me in the wrong section. I thought about getting up to find them, but Royce had said not to move, so I didn't. By the time the sun started going down outside the big windows, I was scared. My stomach hurt. I needed to use the bathroom, but I was afraid if I left the bench they'd come back and think I'd run away. A janitor walked past pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies. He glanced at me, then kept going. An old woman sat down on the bench across from me and opened a book. She looked up once, saw me watching her, and smiled. I didn't smile back. When the overhead lights got brighter, because it was getting dark, I finally understood. They weren't coming back. I didn't know why. I didn't know what I'd done wrong. But I knew what waiting felt like when it stopped being waiting and started being something else. Something colder. Something that made my chest feel tight and my eyes burn. I pulled Cotton out of my suitcase and held him against my chest. He smelled like home, like the apartment we'd lived in with the broken heater and the neighbor who played music too loud. I wanted to cry, but I was 6 and I'd learned that crying made Royce angry, so I bit my lip and breathed through my nose and tried to be good. Maybe if I was good enough they'd come back. That's when Calder Hale walked past me for the first time. I didn't know his name yet. He was just a man in dark jeans and a gray sweater, carrying a briefcase that looked almost as old as my suitcase. He had brown hair starting to gray at the temples, glasses, and the kind of face that didn't stand out in a crowd. He walked past me, stopped, looked back, and kept walking. 5 minutes later, he walked past again, slower this time. He was pretending to check the departure screens, but I could feel him looking at me. Adults always think kids don't notice when they're being watched, but we do. We notice everything. The third time he came back, he didn't walk past. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. Like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. I nodded. I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers. "Are you waiting for someone?" I nodded again. He looked around the transit hub, at the crowds thinning out as it got later, at my suitcase with the duct tape, at Cotton clutched in my arms. When he looked back at me, something in his expression changed. It wasn't pity exactly. It was something sadder than that. "How long have you been waiting?" I didn't know. It felt like forever. "A while. Do you know what time your parents said they'd be back?" 10 minutes. He checked his watch. Then he did something I didn't expect. He sat down on the bench next to me, but not too close. He left space between us like he knew I might run. He set his briefcase on the floor and leaned back, casual, like we were just two people waiting for the same bus. "My name's Calder," he said. "What's yours?" "Maribel." Then, because Lena had taught me manners, but people call me Mari. "Nice to meet you, Mari." He didn't smile exactly, but his eyes were kind. "Are you hungry?" I was. I was so hungry my stomach had stopped hurting and started feeling empty, like there was a hole inside me. But I shook my head because I wasn't supposed to take things from strangers. "I'm hungry," Calder said, like he was talking to himself. "I think I'm going to get something from that vending machine over there. You can come with me if you want, or you can stay here. Either way is fine." He stood up and walked to the vending machine about 15 feet away. Close enough that I could still see my bench. Close enough that I didn't have to break Royce's rule about not moving. I watched him buy a bag of chips and a granola bar. He came back and sat down again, and this time he opened the granola bar and held it out to me. "I bought 2 by accident," he said. "I can't eat both. Would you help me out?" I took the granola bar. It was peanut butter flavored, the good kind with chocolate chips. I ate it so fast I barely tasted it. Calder ate his chips slowly, not looking at me, giving me space. When I finished, he handed me a bottle of water he'd also bought. I drank half of it in one go. "Thank you," I whispered. "You're welcome." He was quiet for a minute. Then, gentle, like he was afraid the question would break something, "Mari, how long have your parents been gone?" I looked at the clock on the wall. The numbers didn't mean much to me yet, but I knew it had been light outside when they left and now it was dark. "A long time." "Do you know where they went?" "To get tickets." "For what?" "I don't know." I'd never thought to ask. Lena and Royce didn't like questions. They liked it when I was quiet and did what I was told and didn't make things complicated. Calder was quiet again. I could see him thinking, trying to figure out what to do. Most adults would have walked away by now. Most adults would have told themselves it wasn't their problem, that someone else would handle it, that I was probably fine. But Calder stayed. "I think we should find someone who works here," he said finally. "Someone who can help us figure out where your parents went. Would that be okay?" I nodded, but my hands tightened around Cotton. If we found someone who worked here, they might take me away from the bench. They might take me somewhere Lena and Royce couldn't find me when they came back. But they weren't coming back. Some part of me knew that already, even if I couldn't say it out loud. Calder must have seen the fear on my face because he didn't move. Or we could wait a little longer. "I'm not in a hurry. I can wait with you." So he did. He sat on that cold metal bench with me while the transit hub emptied out. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't try to touch me or move me. He just stayed. When I started shivering because the temperature dropped after sunset, he took off his sweater and wrapped it around my shoulders. It was too big and smelled like laundry detergent and something else I couldn't name. Safety, maybe. Warmth. By the time a security guard noticed us, it was after 9. The guard was a young guy with a badge that looked too shiny to be real. He walked over with his thumbs hooked in his belt, trying to look official. "Everything all right here?" he asked Calder, not me. "No," Calder said. This child has been waiting for her parents since this afternoon. They told her they'd be back in 10 minutes. They never returned. The guard's expression changed. He looked at me, then at my suitcase, then back at Calder. Are you her father? No. I'm just someone who noticed she was alone. The guard radioed someone. Within minutes, 2 more security officers showed up, along with a woman in regular clothes who introduced herself as Dana from Transit Services. Dana crouched down in front of me, trying to make herself small and friendly. Hi, sweetheart, she said. Can you tell me your name? Maribel Knox. And your parents' names? Lena and Royce Cortez. Dana wrote everything down. She asked me what they looked like, what they were wearing, if I knew where they'd gone. I answered the best I could, but my voice kept getting quieter. Calder stood a few feet away, watching, making sure I was okay. Every time I looked at him, he nodded, like he was saying it's okay, you're safe, I'm still here. Dana made phone calls. The security guards checked the cameras. They found footage of Lena and Royce walking out of the transit hub 3 hours after they'd left me on the bench. No tickets. No luggage. Just walking out the front doors and getting into a car that had been waiting at the curb. The car drove away. They never looked back. I'm so sorry, honey, Dana said, and I could tell she meant it. We're going to call the police now, okay? They're going to help us find your parents. But I already knew the police wouldn't find them. You don't accidentally leave your kid in a transit hub for 6 hours and then drive away. You do it on purpose. You do it because you want to start over somewhere else and your kid doesn't fit in the picture. The police came. 2 officers, one older and tired-looking, one younger with kind eyes. They asked the same questions Dana had asked. They wrote everything down. They called child services. A social worker showed up around midnight, a woman named Patricia with gray hair and a soft voice who'd probably seen this exact situation 100 times before. Maribel, Patricia said, sitting next to me on the bench where I'd been sitting for 8 hours, we're going to take you somewhere safe tonight, okay? Somewhere warm where you can sleep. And tomorrow we're going to figure everything out. I didn't want to go. If I left the bench, if I left the transit hub, then it would be real. Lena and Royce would really be gone. As long as I stayed, I could pretend they were just late. That's when Calder, who'd been standing quietly in the background this whole time, stepped forward. He looked at Patricia, then at the police officers, then at me. What happens to her? He asked. After tonight? Patricia sighed. We'll try to locate her parents, but based on what the security footage shows, this appears to be voluntary abandonment. If we can't find relatives willing to take her, she'll enter the foster system. How long does that usually take? Could be days. Could be months. Depends on a lot of factors. Calder was quiet. I watched him think, the same way I'd watched him think earlier when he was trying to figure out what to do about me. Then he said something that changed everything. What if I took her? Patricia blinked. I'm sorry. What if I became her guardian? Temporarily, at least, until you figure out where her parents are. The police officers exchanged glances. Patricia looked at Calder like he'd just suggested flying to the moon. Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but that's not how this works. You're a stranger. We can't just hand a child over to someone we don't know. So do a background check. I'll wait. I'll give you whatever information you need. Calder pulled out his wallet and handed Patricia his driver's license. My name is Calder James Hale. I live in Denver. I work from home as a financial consultant. I own my house outright. No mortgage. No criminal record. I'm not married, no kids, no family nearby. I can provide references. I can provide financial statements. Whatever you need to verify that I'm not a threat to this child. Mr. Hale. She's been sitting on this bench for 8 hours waiting for parents who abandoned her. Now you want to put her in a car with another stranger and take her to another unfamiliar place where she'll sleep in a bed that isn't hers and wake up tomorrow in a system that's going to shuffle her around until someone decides she's someone else's problem. Calder's voice didn't rise, but it got harder. I'm not saying I'm the perfect solution. I'm saying I'm a solution. And right now, she needs one. Patricia looked at me. So did the police officers. So did Dana and the security guards and everyone else who'd gathered around like this was some kind of show. But Calder was looking at me too, and his eyes were asking a question. Do you trust me? I didn't know him. He was a stranger who'd bought me a granola bar and waited with me when he could have walked away. He'd given me a sweater. He'd made sure I wasn't alone. And when everyone else was talking about me like I wasn't there, like I was a problem to be solved, he was the only one treating me like a person. I nodded. Just once. But it was enough. Patricia made more phone calls. The police ran a background check that came back clean. They called someone from Child Services who'd have to approve the emergency placement. It took hours. Calder sat next to me the whole time, not saying much, just being there. At some point I fell asleep against his arm, cotton still clutched in my hands. When I woke up, it was 3 a.m. and Patricia was standing over us with paperwork. "This is highly irregular," she said, but she was handing Calder a pen. "You'll have to go through the formal process if you want permanent custody. Home visits, evaluations, the whole thing. But for now, emergency placement is approved. She can stay with you for 72 hours while we continue trying to locate her parents." Calder signed the papers. His hand didn't shake once. We walked out of the transit hub together, me carrying my cracked suitcase and Cotton, Calder carrying his briefcase and the weight of a decision that would define both our lives. His car was in the parking lot, an old sedan that smelled like coffee and paper. He helped me into the back seat and buckled my seatbelt, careful not to pull it too tight. "Are you taking me to your house?" I asked. My voice was so small. "Yes." He got in the driver's seat and started the engine. "It's about 20 minutes from here. You can sleep if you want. Are Lena and Royce going to find me there?" Calder looked at me in the rearview mirror. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was gentle but honest. "I don't know, Mari. But if they do, I promise I'll make sure you're safe." I fell asleep before we got to his house. When I woke up, I was in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like clean sheets and wood, covered with a blanket that was softer than anything I'd ever felt. Sunlight came through the window. Birds were singing. Calder was downstairs making breakfast. And Lena and Royce never came back. Comment below if you've ever been chosen by someone who didn't have to choose you. Because what happened next? It wasn't easy. But it was real. Calder's house was small but clean. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A kitchen that smelled like coffee every morning and soup every evening. The furniture was old but comfortable. Books lined every wall, stacked on shelves and piled in corners. Financial journals, classic novels, biographies of people I'd never heard of. He read the way other people breathed, constantly, like he needed it to survive. He put me in the guest room. The bed had a wooden frame and a quilt his mother had made before she died. He told me that the first night, standing in the doorway while I sat on the edge of the mattress holding Cotton. "My mother made that quilt. She'd be happy knowing it's keeping someone warm." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know what to say to any of it. So I nodded and he nodded back and he left the door cracked open in case I got scared during the night. The first week, I barely spoke. Calder didn't push. He made breakfast every morning, scrambled eggs and toast, orange juice in a glass with cartoon characters on it that he must have bought just for me. He showed me where everything was. The bathroom, the kitchen, the living room where the TV only got basic channels because he didn't believe in cable. He explained his rules like they were simple facts instead of orders. Bedtime is 8:30 on school nights, 9 on weekends. You brush your teeth twice a day. You tell me if something hurts or scares you. You don't lie to me and I won't lie to you. "Okay," I whispered. "If you break something, we fix it together. If you make a mess, we clean it together. If you're angry, you can be angry, but you can't hurt anyone or break things on purpose." "Okay." He crouched down so we were eye level. "Mari, I'm not going to pretend I know how to be a parent. I've never done this before. But I promise I'll try my best. And I promise I won't leave you." That promise scared me more than anything else. Because promises break. People leave. I'd learned that on a metal bench in a transit hub, and no amount of scrambled eggs and clean sheets was going to make me forget it. Patricia came by for home visits. She asked me questions about how I was settling in, if I felt safe, if Calder was treating me okay. I told her yes because it was true, but also because I was terrified that if I said anything wrong, they'd take me away and put me somewhere worse. Patricia seemed satisfied. She told Calder he was doing a good job and that the formal adoption paperwork would take months to process. School started 2 weeks after I moved in. Calder enrolled me in the elementary school 3 blocks from his house. He walked me there the first day, holding my hand even though I was 6 and old enough to walk by myself. Kids stared. Teachers smiled too big. Everyone knew I was the girl whose parents had dumped her, even if nobody said it out loud. I didn't make friends. I sat alone at lunch, reading books from Calder's shelves that I barely understood. I didn't cry when other kids whispered about me. I just disappeared inside my head where it was quieter. Calder picked me up every day at 3. He'd be waiting outside the school, hands in his pockets, watching for me. When I came out, he'd ask the same question. How was your day? Fine. Learn anything interesting? Not really. And that was our routine. School, home, dinner, homework at the kitchen table while he worked on his laptop. Bath, pajamas, bed. He read to me sometimes, books about dragons and space and kids who went on adventures. I pretended to listen, but mostly I just watched him, trying to figure out when he'd get tired of me. When he'd realize I was too much work. When he'd drop me off somewhere and drive away like Lena and Royce had. But he didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The adoption went through. Patricia stopped coming by. Calder officially became my legal guardian, and then, 6 months later, my father. Not Dad. He never asked me to call him that. Just Calder, like we were equals instead of adult and child. By the time I was 8, I'd figured out Calder wasn't like other parents. He didn't have friends. He didn't go out. He worked from home doing something with investments and financial planning that I didn't understand. People called him sometimes, serious conversations about markets and portfolios and risk assessment. He'd take notes in neat handwriting, say things like, I wouldn't recommend that position, or let's wait for the quarterly report. Then he'd hang up and make me a snack like nothing had happened. We lived on a budget. Not because we had to, I realized later, but because Calder believed in being careful. We shopped at thrift stores. We ate meals he cooked from scratch. We didn't take vacations. The car he drove was 15 years old. The TV was from the 90s. But the house was paid off and the bills were always current, and I never once heard him stress about money. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Calder had more money than most people see in a lifetime. He just didn't spend it. He invested it, grew it, watched it multiply while living like someone who worked a regular job and saved what he could. He never told me. He never acted like someone who had millions in accounts I'd never heard of. He just acted like Calder, quiet and careful and always there. 3rd grade was when the nightmares started. I'd wake up screaming, convinced I was back in the transit hub, convinced Calder had left me somewhere and wasn't coming back. He'd come into my room, turn on the light, sit in the chair by my bed. He never touched me unless I asked. He'd just sit there, reading a book, being present until I fell back asleep. You're safe, he'd say. I'm here. You won't leave. I won't leave. But I didn't believe him. Not really. So I tested him. I broke things on purpose to see if he'd get angry. I lied about stupid stuff to see if he'd punish me. I told him I hated him, that I wanted to go back to Lena and Royce, that he was the worst parent ever. I said cruel things that would have made any normal person give up. Calder never gave up. He'd listen, nod, wait until I was done raging. Then he'd say, okay, are you finished? Yes. Good. Go to your room and think about whether any of that was true. When you're ready to talk about what's really bothering you, I'll be here. I'd storm to my room and slam the door and cry into my pillow because he wouldn't fight me. He wouldn't give me a reason to hate him. He just kept showing up, kept being steady, kept proving that some promises don't break. By the time I was 10, the nightmares came less often. By 12, I'd stopped testing him. By 14, I'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really wasn't going anywhere. High school was hard for different reasons. I was quiet, intense, bad at social cues. I studied too much because studying was controllable. Grades made sense when people didn't. Calder went to every parent-teacher conference, every school play I wasn't in, every awards ceremony where my name wasn't called. He showed up even when there was nothing to show up for. Why do you come to these things? I asked once, sitting in his car after a school talent show where I hadn't performed. I didn't even do anything. Because you're my daughter, he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. I show up for you whether you're on stage or in the audience. That's what showing up means. I didn't have a response to that. I just looked out the window and tried not to cry. When I was 16, I got curious. Started asking questions about his work, about money, about the phone calls he took in his office with the door closed. He answered what he could, explained concepts like compound interest and diversification and long-term planning. I wasn't interested in finance, but I was interested in him, in the way his mind worked. You're smart with money, I said once. I'm careful with money. There's a difference. Do we have enough? More than enough. I didn't push further. I figured enough meant we could pay bills and eat and keep the lights on. I didn't know enough meant I'd never have to worry about money for the rest of my life. College applications came junior year. Calder helped me fill them out, talked through pros and cons of different schools, never once mentioned cost. I got into a state school with a decent scholarship. He drove me there in August, helped me move into my dorm, hugged me goodbye in the parking lot. Call me if you need anything, he said. I will. And Mari. He looked at me over his glasses, the same way he'd looked at me that first night in the transit hub. I'm proud of you. I nodded because if I spoke I'd cry. He drove away and I stood in the parking lot watching his car disappear and feeling like I was 6 years old again, watching someone leave. But he didn't leave. Not really. He called every week. Came to visit once a month. Sent care packages with homemade cookies and notes that said things like, don't forget to eat, and sleep is not optional. He was there for my graduation, sitting in the crowd with a camera, taking pictures like every other proud parent. I moved back to Denver after college. Got a job at an insurance firm doing claims work that was boring but stable. Rented a studio apartment that was too small but mine. Had dinner with Calder every Sunday. Our routine continued. We'd sit in his kitchen eating whatever he'd cooked, talking about nothing important. Sometimes I'd look at him across the table and wonder what my life would have been like if he hadn't been in that transit hub 20 years ago. If he'd walked past me one more time instead of stopping. I never asked. Some questions don't need answers. The stroke happened on a Tuesday. He called me at work, his voice strange, slurred. Mari, I don't feel right. I drove to his house doing 70 in a 45 zone. Found him on the kitchen floor, conscious but confused. The ambulance came. The hospital admitted him. The doctors said words like massive stroke and significant damage, and we'll do everything we can. He died 2 days later without waking up. 1 minute he was there, the next he wasn't, and I didn't get to say goodbye. The funeral was small. People from his work came, colleagues I'd never met who talked about how brilliant he was, how he'd helped them manage their finances, how he'd given them advice that made them wealthy. A neighbor came, the old woman who'd lived next door for 15 years and waved at Calder every morning. Patricia came, retired now but still remembering the little girl on the bench and the man who'd insisted on taking her home. I stood at the front of the funeral home looking at a casket that contained the only person who'd ever chosen me, and I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel anything except empty. The lawyer called me a week later. Calder's estate needed to be settled. There was a will. Could I come in? I went. Sat in a leather chair in an office downtown. The lawyer, an old man named Mr. Garrison, had worked with Calder for 30 years. He opened a folder and started reading, and with every word, my understanding of Calder shifted. He hadn't been careful with money because he was poor. He'd been careful because he was rich. Investments worth millions. Properties I didn't know existed. Accounts that had been growing for decades. And all of it, every single dollar, left to me. $8.5 million. I couldn't process it. Couldn't understand why he'd lived in a small house and driven an old car and bought my clothes at thrift stores if he'd had this kind of money. Mr. Garrison must have seen the confusion on my face. Calder believed in living below his means, he said gently. He believed in saving for what mattered. And you, Miss Knox, were what mattered. I sat there holding paperwork that proved I was a millionaire, and all I wanted was to go back to Sunday dinners in a small kitchen with a man who'd read to me about dragons. That's when Mr. Garrison's secretary knocked on the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are two people here claiming to be Miss Knox's parents. They say they need to speak with her immediately." My stomach dropped. Mr. Garrison looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Do you want to see them?" I should have said no. I should have walked out the back door and never looked back. But some stupid part of me needed to know. Needed to see if they'd changed. If 20 years had made them different people. "Send them in," I said. The door opened. And there they were. Lena and Royce Cortez, older but still recognizable. Dressed nice. Smiling like we were about to have a reunion instead of a reckoning. "Mari," Lena said, like we'd just seen each other yesterday. Like she hadn't left me on a bench and driven away. "Baby, we've been looking everywhere for you." That's when I knew. They hadn't come for me. They'd come for the money. And that's when everything got worse. They thought showing up was enough. They thought blood would erase 20 years of absence. Subscribe to see what happened when they realized they were wrong. Because the courtroom? That was just the beginning. Lena moved first. She crossed Mr. Garrison's office like she owned it, arms open like she expected me to hug her. I stood up and stepped back. She stopped, hurt flashing across her face. It might have been convincing if her eyes hadn't immediately flicked to the paperwork on the desk, to the numbers probably visible from where she stood. "Mari, honey, I know this must be shocking," she said. Her voice was different. Softer, more careful, like she was talking to a wounded animal. "But we've been searching for you for years. When we heard about Calder's death, How did you hear?" I interrupted. She blinked. "What? How did you hear about Calder's death?" "It wasn't in the news. There was no obituary outside of a small notice in a Denver paper." "So how did you know?" Royce stepped forward. He looked exactly how I remembered him, just older. Same hard eyes, same thin mouth. "We've had people looking for you, Mari. Making sure you were okay. For 20 years? It's complicated." "No, it's not." My hands were shaking, so I shoved them in my pockets. "You left me in a transit hub. You drove away. You never filed a missing person report. You never called the police. You never tried to find me. So don't stand there and tell me you've been looking." Mr. Garrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should schedule another time for this conversation. Miss Knox has had a difficult week." "We're her parents," Royce said, his voice getting hard. "We have a right to be here." "You have no rights here," I said. "Calder adopted me legally. You signed away your parental rights when you abandoned me." "We were young," Lena said, and now the tears were starting. Perfect, practice tears that probably worked on most people. "We were broke. We didn't know how to take care of you. We thought you'd have a better life." "In a transit hub?" She flinched. Royce put his hand on her shoulder, protective, and something about that gesture made me want to scream. Where was that protectiveness 20 years ago? Where was it when I was 6 and scared and waiting for parents who never came back? "We made mistakes," Royce said. "We're not denying that. But we're here now. We want to make things right. You want the money." Silence. Lena's tears stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Royce's jaw tightened. Mr. Garrison shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, probably wishing he'd never let them in the door. "We heard Calder left you a substantial estate," Royce said finally. "As your biological parents, we believe we have a claim. Get out. Mari, get out before I call security." Lena's face changed. The softness disappeared, replaced by something sharp and cold. "You think you can just take that money? That man stole you from us. He manipulated you. We have lawyers, Mari. We have rights. Blood is blood." "Then go talk to your lawyers," I said. "And I'll talk to mine." They left, but not before Royce turned at the door and said, "You'll regret this. Family matters more than anything some stranger gave you." After they were gone, I sat back down in the leather chair. My legs felt weak. Mr. Garrison poured me a glass of water from a pitcher on his desk. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," he said. "Will they actually sue me?" "They might try." He sat down across from me, suddenly looking very old and very tired. Calder anticipated this possibility. He left extensive documentation. Adoption papers, letters explaining his reasoning, financial records proving his estate predated his guardianship of you. If they do sue, we'll have everything we need to fight it. Why didn't he tell me? My voice cracked. Why didn't he tell me he had this much money? Why do we live like we were barely getting by? Because he wanted you to grow up normal. He wanted you to understand the value of things, to work for what you wanted, to not rely on wealth you hadn't earned. Mr. Garrison pulled out another folder, this one with my name written on the tab. He left you letters. One for if he died suddenly, like he did. And others, to be opened at specific times in your life. He wanted to explain everything himself, in his own words. He handed me an envelope. My name was written on it in Calder's precise handwriting. I held it but didn't open it. I wasn't ready to hear his voice in my head. Not yet. 3 days later, Lena and Royce filed a lawsuit. They hired an attorney named Marcus Hendricks who specialized in estate disputes. The lawsuit claimed that Calder's adoption of me had been coerced, that I'd been too young to consent, that my biological parents had been searching for me and been illegally blocked from contact. It claimed that as my biological parents, they had a superior claim to the estate based on blood relation and familial bonds. It was all lies. Documented, provable lies. But lies that would have to be disproven in court, which meant months of legal battles and depositions and strangers picking apart my entire life. My lawyer, Ms. Brennan, was a woman in her 50s who'd worked with Mr. Garrison before. She sat across from me in her office and laid out the reality. They don't have a strong case, she said. But they're banking on you settling. Most people don't want to go through a trial. They'll offer to drop the lawsuit if you give them some portion of the estate. Maybe $1 million, maybe 2. Enough for them to go away happy. I'm not giving them anything. Good. Then we go to trial. The depositions were worse than I'd imagined. Lena and Royce sat across a conference table from me, their lawyer asking questions designed to make me look bad. Was I aware Calder had significant wealth? Had I ever asked him for money? Had I maintained contact with him primarily for financial gain? I answered honestly. No, I didn't know. No, I never asked. No, I maintained contact with him because he was my father. Your father, Marcus Hendricks repeated, like the word tasted bad. Not your biological father. My father in every way that matters. But not by blood. Blood doesn't make you a parent. Showing up makes you a parent. He smiled like I'd said something useful. So you're saying that biology doesn't matter? That genetic relation is meaningless. I'm saying that the people who gave birth to me left me in a transit hub and never came back. The man who found me there raised me, loved me, and gave me a life. If you think blood matters more than that, then you don't understand what family means. Lena cried during her deposition. She talked about how young she'd been, how overwhelmed, how she'd thought someone at the transit hub would help me find family services. She talked about how she'd regretted it every day, how she'd tried to find me but didn't know where to start. She talked about how seeing the news of Calder's death had broken her heart because it meant I'd grown up without my real parents. It was a good performance. If I hadn't been there that night, if I hadn't spent 8 hours waiting on a cold bench while they drove away in a car that had been waiting for them, I might have even believed her. Royce was different. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. He sat there and explained, like he was talking about a business decision, that they'd been young and broke and unable to care for a child. That leaving me in a public place where someone would find me had been the responsible choice. That they'd always intended to come back for me once they got on their feet, but life had gotten complicated. How complicated? Ms. Brennan asked. We moved to California. Started over. Things were hard for a while. Did you have other children? A pause. No. Did you ever try to contact Maribel after leaving Colorado? Another pause. We thought she was better off. Better off without parents who wanted her? Better off with someone who could provide for her. Ms. Brennan pulled out a document. Mr. Cortez, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 17. Can you identify this? Royce looked at the paper. His face went pale. Where did you get that? Can you identify it? It's a letter. A letter sent to you by Calder Hale 15 years ago, offering to facilitate contact with Maribel. A letter that included his phone number, his address, and an invitation to call at any time. Did you respond to this letter? Royce looked at his lawyer. Marcus Hendricks jumped in. My client doesn't recall receiving that letter. It was sent certified mail. We have the signature confirming receipt. Ms. Brennan was calm, relentless. Mr. Cortez signed for it himself. So I'll ask again. Did you respond? No. Why not? I don't know. I don't remember. But he did remember. I could see it in his face. He'd gotten that letter and thrown it away because contacting me would have meant admitting what he'd done. It would have meant facing a daughter he'd abandoned and explaining why he'd never looked back. The trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, the story leaked. Local news picked it up first. Abandoned child inherits millions. Biological parents sue. Then it went national. My face was on the internet, my story dissected by strangers who had opinions about who deserved what. Some people thought I was lucky. Some thought I was greedy. Some thought Lena and Royce deserved a second chance. Some thought they deserved prison. Everyone had something to say about my life, and none of them knew what it felt like to be 6 years old and alone. I stopped reading the comments. Stopped checking social media. Went to work, came home, tried to pretend my world wasn't falling apart for the second time in 3 months. My coworkers whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. My boss called me into his office to ask if the publicity would affect my work. I told him no and wondered if I was lying. The night before the trial, I finally opened Calder's letter. Sat on the floor of my apartment with Pepper curled up next to me and read words written by a man who'd known he might die before I was ready. Dear Maribel, it started. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye. I'm sorry I didn't get to see what kind of adult you became, though I think I already know. You're strong. You're stubborn. You don't trust easily, and I don't blame you for that. My hands were shaking. I kept reading. By now you know about the money. You're probably angry I didn't tell you. Maybe you think I lied to you. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything, because I wanted you to grow up knowing your worth wasn't tied to a bank account. I wanted you to work for things, to value effort, to understand that money solves some problems but creates others. The letter went on for 3 pages. It explained his investments, his philosophy, his hopes for what I'd do with the inheritance. But the part that broke me was at the end. You were never unwanted, Maribel. That night in the transit hub, when I saw you sitting alone, I didn't stop because I felt obligated. I stopped because I saw something in you that I recognized. You were lost, and I'd been lost too, most of my life. I didn't save you. You saved me. You gave me a reason to care about tomorrow. You gave me a family. And I know Lena and Royce might come back someday, looking for what they think they're owed. If they do, remember this. You don't owe them anything. Not forgiveness, not money, not a second of your time. You were chosen, every single day, by someone who loved you not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That's worth more than blood. That's worth everything. I sat on that floor and cried until Pepper got worried and started pawing at my face. Then I folded the letter, put it in my purse, and got ready for court. The next morning, I walked into that courtroom alone. Lena and Royce were already there, dressed nice, looking confident. They thought they'd won before it even started. They didn't know about the letters. They didn't know about the evidence. They didn't know that sometimes the universe keeps score and payment comes due when you least expect it. The clerk stood. All rise. The judge walked in. And everything they'd counted on started to crumble. They gambled on my silence and lost. Subscribe because what the judge said next ended them. And if you believe karma is real, comment, chosen below. The judge was a black woman in her 60s named Judith Okafor. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses that she peered over when she wanted to make a point, and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. I'd learned that from Ms. Brennan, who'd seemed relieved when we'd drawn Judge Okafor for the case. She's fair, Ms. Brennan had said. But she doesn't suffer fools. If your biological parents think they can waltz in with a sob story and no evidence, they're in for a surprise. Now, sitting in the courtroom watching Judge Okafor review the case file, I hoped Ms. Brennan was right. Because Lena and Royce's lawyer, Marcus Hendricks, looked too confident for someone whose case was built on lies. He kept leaning over to whisper to them, and they kept nodding, and I kept thinking about Calder's letter in my purse. You were chosen. Judge Okafor looked up from the file. I've reviewed the preliminary materials submitted by both parties. Mr. Hendricks, you're representing the petitioners Lena and Royce Cortez. Ms. Brennan, you're representing the respondent Maribel Knox. Before we proceed with testimony, I want to make something clear. This court's primary concern is not who gets money. This court's concern is the validity of legal documents and the protection of a then-minor child's rights. If anyone in this room thinks this is about inheritance, you're in the wrong place. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers said. Good. Mr. Hendricks, your clients are contesting the adoption and will have Calder Hale on the grounds that the adoption was coerced and that Miss Knox manipulated Mr. Hale for financial gain. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. My clients were young and made a mistake 20 years ago, but blood relation. I've read your brief, Mr. Hendricks. You don't need to argue your case before we've heard evidence. Ms. Brennan, you're defending the adoption as legal and Mr. Hale's will as a legitimate expression of his wishes. Correct? Yes, Your Honor. Then let's proceed. Mr. Hendricks, call your first witness. Marcus Hendricks called Lena first. She walked to the witness stand in a navy dress that looked expensive but not too expensive, like someone had advised her on what wealthy people who wanted sympathy should wear. She swore to tell the truth, sat down, and immediately looked at me with tears in her eyes. Marcus Hendricks started gentle. Asked her to state her name, her age, her relationship to me. Asked her to describe the day she and Royce left me at the transit hub. Lena's voice shook when she answered. We were 23 and 26. We had no money, no family support, no idea how to take care of a 6-year-old. We'd been evicted from our apartment. We were sleeping in our car. We thought. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. We thought if we left Mari somewhere safe, someone would help her. Someone better than us. Did you intend to abandon your daughter permanently? No. God, no. We thought we'd come back once we got on our feet. We thought it would just be a few weeks, maybe a month. But you didn't come back. Life got hard. We moved to California looking for work. We were barely surviving. We told ourselves Mari was better off, that she'd been placed with a good family through the system. We didn't know how to find her. It was a good story. Sympathetic. The kind of story that made people think about second chances and forgiveness. The jury, 6 people who'd probably never abandoned a child in their lives, watched Lena with soft expressions. When did you learn about Calder Hale? Marcus Hendricks asked. A few months ago. We saw a news article about his death, about how he'd left millions to his adopted daughter. We started researching and realized the daughter was Mari. Our Mari. What did you feel when you learned this? Heartbroken. Guilty. We'd missed her entire childhood. But also, she looked at the jury, at the judge, then at me. Confused. Why had this man kept our daughter from us? Why had he never tried to contact us? It felt like he'd stolen her. Ms. Brennan stood up. Objection. Speculation and inflammatory language. Sustained, Judge Okafor said. Mr. Hendricks, instruct your witness to stick to facts. My apologies, Your Honor. Marcus Hendricks turned back to Lena. Did Mr. Hale ever attempt to contact you about your daughter? Not that I recall. So you never received any letters, phone calls, or attempts at communication regarding Maribel? No. Thank you, Ms. Cortez. No further questions. Ms. Brennan stood. She didn't rush to the podium. She took her time, arranged her notes, let the silence build. When she finally looked at Lena, her expression was neutral, but her voice was sharp. Ms. Cortez, you testified that you left Maribel in the transit hub because you had no money and no home. Is that correct? Yes. And you testified that you intended to come back for her once you got on your feet. Correct? Yes. How long after leaving Maribel in that transit hub did you and Mr. Cortez leave Colorado? Lena hesitated. I don't remember exactly. Let me refresh your memory. According to transit security footage and police reports, you and Mr. Cortez left Maribel on a bench at approximately 2 p.m. on June 14th. You were seen leaving the transit hub at 5 p.m. that same day. 3 hours later, you were recorded at a gas station 100 miles outside Denver, heading west. Does that sound accurate? I suppose. So you didn't leave Maribel and then struggle for weeks or months trying to survive in Colorado. You left her and immediately drove out of state. We were looking for work in California. Without your daughter. We thought she'd be better off. Yes, you've said that. Let me ask a different question. In the 20 years between abandoning Maribel and filing this lawsuit, how many times did you attempt to contact her? Silence. Ms. Cortez. We didn't know how to find her. Did you file a missing person report? No, but... Did you contact Colorado Social Services? No. Did you hire a private investigator? We couldn't afford that. Ms. Brennan walked over to the evidence table and picked up a stack of papers. Ms. Cortez, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 12. Can you identify this? Lena looked at the papers. Her face went pale. I don't know what that is. It's a compilation of your social media posts from the past 15 years. Photos from your life in California. Would you like me to describe some of them? Ms. Brennan didn't wait for an answer. Here's one from 10 years ago. You and Mr. Cortez at a winery in Napa Valley. Caption says, living our best life. Here's another from 8 years ago. You at a resort in Mexico. Caption says, much needed vacation. And here's one from 6 years ago. You and Mr. Cortez at a restaurant in San Francisco. Caption says, celebrating 5 years in California. Lena was crying now, but they weren't sympathetic tears anymore. They were panicked tears. In none of these posts, Ms. Brennan continued, is there any mention of a missing daughter? No posts asking for help finding her. No posts expressing regret. Just photos of you and Mr. Cortez living your lives like Maribel never existed. Does that sound like parents who were desperate to find their child? We were trying to move on. From what? A daughter you claim to love. Objection, Marcus Hendricks said, standing. Argumentative. Sustained. Move on, Ms. Brennan. Ms. Brennan put the photos down and picked up a different document. Ms. Cortez, I'm now showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 17. This is a letter sent to you by Calder Hale 15 years ago. Do you recognize it? I don't think so. It was sent certified mail to your address in Sacramento, California. It was signed for by you on March 3rd, 15 years ago. I have the signature receipt. Would you like to see it? Lena didn't answer. This letter, Ms. Brennan said, reading now, says the following. Dear Ms. Cortez and Mr. Cortez, my name is Calder Hale. I am the legal guardian of Maribel Knox, your biological daughter. I am writing to inform you that Maribel is safe, healthy, and thriving in my care. If you wish to contact her or establish a relationship with her, I am open to facilitating that contact in a way that prioritizes Maribel's emotional well-being. Please feel free to call me at the number below or write to the address listed. I believe children deserve to know their biological parents if those parents are willing to be positive influences in their lives. Sincerely, Calder Hale. The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Okafor was leaning forward. Ms. Cortez, did you respond to this letter? I don't remember receiving it. But you signed for it. We have proof. Then maybe I threw it away. Why would you throw away a letter telling you where your missing daughter was? No answer. Ms. Cortez, isn't it true that you and Mr. Cortez received this letter, knew exactly where Maribel was, and chose not to respond because contacting her would mean admitting what you'd done? Isn't it true that you only came looking for her after you found out she'd inherited millions of dollars? That's not true. Then why didn't you respond to the letter? I don't know. You don't know, or you don't want to say? Objection. Marcus Hendricks was on his feet, badgering the witness. Withdrawn, Ms. Brennan said. She looked at the judge. No further questions. Lena practically ran off the witness stand. Royce was next. He was calmer than Lena, more controlled, but Ms. Brennan tore into him the same way. Asked about the letter, about their life in California, about the fact that they'd had 20 years to find me and never tried. He had no good answers. Just excuses and deflections that got weaker with every question. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand feeling strangely calm. I'd spent weeks dreading this moment, but now that it was here, I just wanted it done. I swore to tell the truth and sat down. Ms. Brennan asked me to describe that night in the transit hub. I did, as simply as I could. How long I'd waited. How scared I'd been. How Calder had stopped when everyone else walked by. How he'd stayed with me until the police came, and then beyond that, into every day of my life for 20 years. Did Calder ever speak poorly of your biological parents? Ms. Brennan asked. No. He didn't talk about them at all unless I asked. And when I did ask, he just said they'd made choices he couldn't explain. Did he try to replace them? No. He never asked me to call him Dad. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. He was just there. Did you know he was wealthy? Not until after he died. Did he ever give you reason to believe you'd inherit his estate? No. I thought everything he had was tied up in the house and his work. I didn't know there was anything to inherit. Marcus Hendricks's cross-examination was brief. He asked if I loved Calder, if I'd spent time with him by choice, if I'd ever felt manipulated. I answered yes, yes, and no. He tried to make it sound like I'd been groomed or coerced, but even he seemed to realize how weak it sounded. Judge Okafor called a 15-minute recess. When we came back, she didn't ask for closing arguments. She just sat at her bench, looked at Lena and Royce with an expression that could have frozen water, and started talking. I've been a family court judge for 28 years. I've seen a lot of cases. Custody battles, adoption disputes, parental rights terminations. But this case stands out, and not in a good way. Lena was crying again. Royce had his head down. Mr. and Ms. Cortez, you abandoned your 6-year-old daughter in a public place and drove away. You didn't file a missing person report. You didn't contact social services. You moved out of state and started over like she'd never existed. When a kind man found her and gave her a home, you didn't respond to his letter offering to connect you with her. You had 20 years to find her. 20 years to make amends. You didn't. And now, after that kind man has died, you show up claiming blood rights to his estate. The judge's voice got colder. This court has reviewed extensive evidence. Adoption records that show Mr. Hale went through every proper channel. Financial records that show his wealth predated his guardianship of Miss Knox by more than a decade. Therapy records that document the trauma she experienced from being abandoned. Letters and documentation that show Mr. Hale tried to contact you and you ignored him. And most damningly, your own social media posts showing that you lived comfortable lives in California while your daughter grew up without you. Your Honor, Marcus Hendricks tried to interrupt. I'm not finished, Mr. Hendricks. Sit down. He sat. Blood relation does not grant you automatic rights to a child you willingly abandoned. It does not entitle you to an estate left by a man who actually raised that child. Legal adoption is final and binding, and the adoption of Maribel Knox was conducted properly and legally. The will of Calder Hale is clear in its intent and supported by extensive documentation. This court finds no grounds for your petition. Judge Okafor picked up her gavel. The petition is denied. The will stands as written. Mr. Hale's estate goes to Miss Knox as he intended. This case is closed. The gavel came down. The sound echoed through the courtroom. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lena made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She grabbed Royce's arm, her nails digging into his jacket. This isn't fair, she said, her voice rising. She's our daughter. We have rights. Judge Okafor didn't even look up. She was already gathering her papers. You had rights 20 years ago, Ms. Cortez. You gave them up. Bailiff, please escort the petitioners out if they can't control themselves. Royce stood up, pulling Lena with him. His face was red, angry. You can't do this. We'll appeal. We'll take this to a higher court. There's no grounds for appeal, Mr. Cortez, Judge Okafor said, finally looking at him. Your case had no merit. You abandoned your daughter. A good man gave her a home. That man left her his estate. That's the end of the story. Now get out of my courtroom. They left, Marcus Hendricks following behind them looking defeated. I heard Lena crying in the hallway, heard Royce's voice raised in anger. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything except tired. Ms. Brennan touched my shoulder. You won. I know. Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer that. I'd won, but Calder was still dead. I had $8.5 million, but nobody to share it with. Lena and Royce were gone, but the scars from that night in the transit hub were still there, would always be there. I will be, I said finally. Outside the courthouse, Reporters were waiting. Cameras, microphones, people shouting questions. Ms. Brennan shielded me, got me to her car. We drove in silence for a while. When she finally dropped me off at my apartment, she handed me a folder. These are the other letters Calder left for you. One for your 30th birthday, one for your wedding day, one for when you have your first child. If you have one, I mean. You don't have to. It's just she stopped, looking embarrassed. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. Thank you, I said, taking the folder. For everything. You deserve to win, Maribel. I hope you know that. I went inside, fed Pepper, sat on my floor, and opened the folder. There were 5 more letters inside, each labeled with an event or age. I pulled out the one marked after the trial. Dear Maribel, it started. If you're reading this, it means Lena and Royce came back. It means they tried to take what was never theirs. And it means you fought them. I'm proud of you. My eyes were burning. I kept reading. I knew they might come back someday. That's why I kept records. That's why I sent them that letter 15 years ago, the one I knew they wouldn't respond to. I wanted documentation. I wanted proof that they'd been given every opportunity to be your parents, and they'd chosen not to be. I wanted to protect you, even after I was gone. The letter went on for 2 pages. It talked about what he hoped I'd do with the money. How he hoped I'd use it to build a life that mattered, to help people who needed it, to never forget what it felt like to be alone. And then, at the end, there was a paragraph that made me cry until Pepper got worried again. You asked me once why I stopped that night in the transit hub, why I didn't just walk away like everyone else. The truth is, I almost did. I walked past you 3 times, telling myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would help. But the 3rd time, I really looked at you, and I saw myself. I'd been alone most of my life. I'd been successful in business, but empty everywhere else. I didn't have family. I didn't have people who cared if I lived or died. And then there you were, 6 years old and shaking, waiting for people who weren't coming back. I stopped because I thought maybe we could save each other. And we did. You gave me a reason to matter. You gave me a family. You were never a burden, Maribel. You were never unwanted. You were chosen, every single day, by someone who loved you more than money, more than comfort, more than anything. Remember that. Especially now, when people are trying to tell you that blood matters more than love. It doesn't. It never did. With all my love, Calder. I sat there on my floor holding a letter from a dead man who'd loved me more than the people who'd made me. And I finally understood. Family wasn't about blood. It wasn't about biology or genetics or who gave birth to whom. Family was about showing up. About staying when things got hard. About choosing someone every single day and proving it with actions, not words. Calder had chosen me. And even though he was gone, that choice was still protecting me, still loving me, still proving that I'd mattered to someone. 3 weeks later, I started the Calder Hale Foundation for Abandoned and Foster Children. I used half the inheritance to fund it, to create programs and resources and support systems for kids who needed someone to show up. I worked with social services, with foster agencies, with schools. I hired people who cared. I made sure that no kid would ever have to sit on a bench wondering if they mattered. Lena and Royce tried to appeal. The appeal was denied in less than a week. They tried to sell their story to tabloids. Nobody cared. They sent me letters, emails, messages on social media. I blocked them all. They'd had their chance. They'd had 20 years of chances. They'd chosen wrong every single time, and I was done giving them opportunities they'd never earned. On what would have been Calder's 68th birthday, I visited his grave. The headstone was simple. Just his name, his dates, and a line I'd chosen. He showed up. I sat in the grass next to the marker and talked to him like he was still there. Told him about the foundation, about the first family we'd helped, about the look on a 7-year-old's face when she found out she was getting adopted by people who wanted her. I told him thank you. I told him I understood now why he'd lived the way he did, why he'd kept his wealth quiet, why he'd wanted me to grow up normal. I miss you, I said out loud. Every day, I miss you. But you were right. I was chosen. And that matters more than anything they tried to take. The wind picked up, moving through the trees around the cemetery. It felt like an answer. Like Calder saying, I know. I'm still here. You were always worth choosing. I stood up, brushed grass off my jeans, and walked back to my car. I had a meeting with the foundation's board in an hour. We were expanding, opening a second location, helping more kids. The work was hard, but it mattered. And every kid we helped was proof that Calder's choice to stop in that transit hub 20 years ago was still changing lives. Blood doesn't make you family. Love makes you family. Commitment makes you family. Showing up day after day, year after year, makes you family. And I was chosen. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more true stories where love wins over blood, where justice catches up, where the people who show up matter more than the people who gave up. And if you've ever been chosen by someone who didn't have to choose you, drop a comment below. Because those people, they're the real heroes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.